Hi, everybody. Welcome to the latest episode of Vox Vomitus. I am your host, Jennifer Ann Gordon, the author of the Kindle Award-winning novel Beautiful, Frightening, and Silent, as well as the Hotel series, and officially Pretty Ugly, which was released yesterday. With me, as always, is my Vox Vomitus vixen, Allison Martine, the author of the Bourbon books. And today we have a legendary author with us. He is gracing us with his presence. It is Mr. Joe Lansdale. You probably know him because he's written 40 of your favorite books. He wrote Bubba Ho-Tep. He has written cartoons, comic books, TV shows, movies, everything. He's won every award you've ever wanted to win yourself. And he is here with us, and we're going to be talking about his amazing career and as well as his new book, Moon Lake. Welcome,
Thank
Joe.
you for having me here. Thank you.
Tell our audience and our viewers a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, okay. I was born in Gladewater, Texas, which is about an hour and a half from here. And it's a small town of about 4,000, but we moved to a smaller town of 150 when I was about 4. And I grew up there till I was in the 5th grade. And then we moved back to Gladewater because we were looking for the metropolis. And my father was a mechanic. He could not read or write. He learned later to write his name and to read a little bit. My mother was a very dedicated reader. And my father, like I said, was a mechanic. My mother did sales. She used to sell World Book from door to door. And so I read almost the entire World Book because that's what was there. I think I was short like one volume. And for whatever reason, why do you quit with one volume left? But I did. And so I had the big World Book dictionary. And so I grew up with that. And we didn't have a library in Mount Enterprise at that time. They were clever about building one when we moved, just about a very short time before we moved, the summer before. But they had a bookmobile. And there was another kid there. I don't even remember his name, but he didn't like to read. And so he let me choose the books that he would check out, and he would give me his books too. And I would read all of them before the bookmobile came back. And there was a lady across the street. Her name was Ermedine. I can't remember her last name, but she loaned me some Hardy Boys that her kids had before they grew up and went off. So, and my mother would pick up used books and stuff. We didn't have much money for books, so most of them were used. And I remember people coming in and, why have you got all these books? And my mother, who was a very polite and very easygoing woman, but she was irritated at that. And she said, well, we stack them up and stand on them. And I thought, well, yeah, that probably made more sense to a lot of those people. Because readers weren't.
You couldn't possibly read them. That's crazy.
Oh, yeah. There are a lot of readers now, but comic books were the thing that really got me going. And when I was about 4, I started reading comic books. And I learned how to read through comic books with my mother and my sister-in-law, Mary, reading to me because my brother was 17 years older than I was. And so, that way it was more like 2 only children. We kind of joke we're both only child. But I started reading comics, and I was so excited by them that I started trying to draw them and write the little balloons and the stuff. And I never got anything finished, but I would write that. And then I discovered that I was probably a wizard as an artist. I was probably an outstanding, amazing artist. And then when I turned 6, I was still the same artist I was when I was 4. And as I got closer to school and had not graduated at all, I was still that same artist.
Look, you were a wonderkind at 4. Just hold on to that.
Yeah.
Best artist.
Always remember.
I got it at 4.
That should be in your bio. Like world's greatest artist by the age of 4.
At 4.
Yeah, there's a lot in there, but I didn't need anything about art.
Yeah. But what I found is I like the stories, and the stories appealed to me more. And I began to grow with the stories, and the stories just became more interesting. And then, I began to, and I also have to give TV credit because TV was relatively new then. I was born in 1951. And by the time I was 4 and 5 years old, TV was beginning to be a thing, and they were starting to borrow things to put on television. So some of the things that they borrowed were old movie serials and old movies. And so that's where I first saw all the old Tarzan movies. That's where I saw Universal horror films and all of that stuff. And I was just a fanatic for it. And all of that led me to the source material. And I started reading Edgar Rice Burroughs and Jack London and Mark Twain, et cetera, et cetera. And I wanted to be a writer early on, even though I didn't really quite understand what that was. I knew that I wanted to do it. I didn't know people did it for a career because I didn't know what a career was, but I knew I wanted to do it. And then when I read Edgar Rice Burroughs, I knew I had to do it, because it was just perfect for a kid when I was about 10 or 11. And that got me going. And Classics Illustrated comics also led me to all of the books and stories they had adapted, or at least most of them. And so that's kind of why I became a writer.
Allison will probably pop back in a second. I used to own a comic book store. I'm a huge comic book fan. So I have to ask, who was your favorite growing up? And is that like your favorite superhero or your favorite comic? Was it Tarzan or?
Well, I love Tarzan, but.
Oh, no. I have no idea what's happening.
Hello. StreamYard kicked me out. So it probably kicked out Joe too. So I was sitting there for a second waiting to get back in.
We're all back.
No, I was saying I love I love Tarzan, but the Classics Illustrated, the Tarzan, I didn't start reading those books until later. I read John Carter of Mars. It was the science fictional stuff of his. But the comics, it was probably, the superhero was Batman. And it still is. And I've written Batman. I've worked in that field. So I'm kind of, branded. I've made a full circle. And, I liked all of the DC comics in particular. And when the Marvel came along, I thought they were better written at that time. But I always preferred the DC comics. I like The Flash, and I like Batman and Superman and Wonder Woman and so on and so on. But I read a lot of off-channel comics too, things that aren't even around anymore, and I read some of the funny animal comics, but I was reasonably precocious, and in a very short time, I was reading novels, when I was very young, and I'm sure that I didn't understand a lot of them, but I remembered a lot of them. And Classics Illustrated caused me to pick those novels when I could go to Gladewater. I had a library card there, even though we lived in Mount Enterprise. And then when I went to Gladewater, I lived in that library. And that was my thing. And then on Saturdays, I'd go in, read at the library all day, check out books. And then I would walk to the drugstore where you could buy a hamburger and stuff at the drugstore. Then I'd have a hamburger. Then I'd go over next door to the show, which was right behind it. We called it the picture show, which, the movie, a theater. And so we would go in and I would watch the serials, and then I would watch the kids movie. And then I would watch the two movies. One of them was usually a B movie and shorter, but you didn't have to leave when they were over, and I'd just stay all day. And so I think I learned a lot.
That's the perfect day.
By doing that. Yeah, the perfect day. And then I'd go home, and then if I didn't get in trouble, I'd stay up and read a little bit, and then
I was going to ask if your parents knew where you were all day, or was it just like,
they knew I
in the morning?
And it was, that was really kind of a safe place to be for me. And back then things seemed safer. Maybe they weren't, but we thought they were. And I never had any trouble. I never had any trouble with it. I could walk from the library to the drugstore, and then the drugstore was next door to the show, and then my mom would come pick me up, or my dad would come pick me up. And sometimes after I'd seen it once, they'd make me leave. But on Saturdays, they tended to let me sit through it that entire time, because they would go over and visit with my aunt and my uncle who lived in Gladewater. And then we would go home. We lived out on the other side of what they called Hell's Half Mile, which was honky tonks and just a rough place. And we lived right next door to a liquor store. So they had an interesting clientele. And, we changed places, but at that time, that's where I lived. We lived in different spots,
But it sounds like the movie theater was your babysitter. And I kind of love that. It's like, all right,
yeah,
we'll watch you. It's fine.
Yeah, the library was my morning babysitter. As soon as it opened, I went in there. And then, the drugstore was a brief stop. And then the theater was my babysitter all day on Saturday. And obviously, during school nights, I didn't get to do that. But during the summer, I just lived in the theater. And I'd go watch the same movie over and over and over because it was air conditioned, for one. And we didn't have air conditioning. There was some air conditioning in some stores, but that wasn't a time when air conditioning was everywhere. We had what they called a swamp cooler, and that's how we cooled ourselves off.
Oh, what's a swamp cooler?
They're not good.
Like the old man. Yeah, well, they were better than anything then, because we'd spray the back of them, and you had a small room. It was fine as long as you were kind of in front of it. It wasn't so bad.
I've had to put
but I'm
like,
the old man
bowls
story
of ice cubes in front of fans before we got our air conditioner, and I'm like, that works.
Yeah. Well, we used to go buy ice by the block, because you didn't have many in you'd have the little ice tray, and it would go up there, maybe 2 ice trays. And when we had like family over, we'd go buy a block of ice, and they would cut a block of ice, and they'd give it to you. You'd take an ice pick and you'd chop it up, and everybody would have the Kool-Aid and the tea and what have you, and along with pimento cheese sandwiches. And then sometimes the kids would have mayonnaise sandwiches.
I'm like, oh no.
Yeah. I thought a mayonnaise sandwich was good back then. I didn't know it was just essentially lard.
I still have just mayonnaise sandwiches, but it is good. It's good. So
it was
Joe,
then.
Yeah. When did you knew you wanted to be a writer at a very young age? At what point did you realize that you were straying towards darker fiction and stranger fiction?
Well, I've always been someone who was attracted to horror and science fiction, and usually the science fiction was more of a dark type. Not always, I like crime. I remember The Edge of Night when I was a kid was a soap opera, which came from the radio show, I think. And Henry Sleeser, who was a crime writer, wrote those. And so I grew up with those. When I was home in the summer with my mom, I would watch those. After Captain Kangaroo, that came on a little later. And so I had my Dancing Bear and, all that stuff, and the cartoons, and then the Tarzan cereal. And then suddenly I'm listening to or watching The Edge of Night. And when I was growing up and I was very young, we still listened to the radio, and the radio was on its last legs as far as those sort of things. But most of those shows, like the soap operas and things, they came from the radio, and people don't realize it, but shows like The Shadow and Suspense were still on when I was a kid. I faintly remember them, and I'm sure they must have affected me, because I've always been like a sponge. And especially when I was younger, I just absorbed all this stuff. And because the people would used to be, how do you know all that stuff about dinosaurs and astronomy and all that? And again, I was another incredible scientist until I was 11 or so, and then I ran out of little.
You had more years as a scientist, though.
But I was interested in everything. I still am. I studied anthropology and archaeology. I never graduated, but that was a big interest. And I think that's what most writers are like. At least I think the ones I respect and admire are the ones that have had some life experience and have had some broader interest. Because a lot of the writers I talk to, if you go back 4 years, they're out. They haven't read anything before that. And when we were growing up, we read all the old stuff because that was available, for one thing. And second of all, it's still respected and revered. Yeah, and there wasn't anybody telling you this is what you should read because this is correct, or this is for for children or whatever. You just read. And, and I read the new stuff, and I read the old stuff, and I'm always was looking for something else, And I think that it was a constant ravenous hunger for information and story. And I've still got it, and it's changed somewhat. It's altered somewhat, but it's still the same in the broader sense.
Well, and I hear what you're saying about, so you were looking into being a scientist for a while. My kind of, which way am I going to pivot in the career path was lawyer or zoologist, but I talk too much to be a zoologist out in the field because I make all the monkeys mad. But I still have a love for that, and so some of my stuff works in that, and that's where my love of science fiction goes, because I actually like the science, and I'm not always good at it because I'm about
I do too.
I'm about a 15-year-old scientist,
right,
way too much math.
I think I was more. Yeah, that's what killed me. The math. I think I was more science fiction oriented. I liked sort of science fiction that was fantasy. I never leaned towards, I'm going to make people mad, but I never liked Tolkien. I couldn't read it. And I read The Hobbit and almost had to do it at gunpoint. I wanted to do it to know what was going on. I read all kinds of things that I wanted to understand the fields of fantasy and science fiction and horror and crime and mainstream and literary. So I read Hemingway one day and maybe, Edgar Rice Burroughs the next, and Edgar Allan Poe one day, and Richard Matheson the next. and Ray Bradbury, you know, and then I might read the Scarlet Pimpernel, you know. I thought that nobody was telling me what to do, and I wasn't going to school to be a writer. When I went to college, I think I took 4 years to get 60 hours, and I had to quit because I didn't have the money. And I started selling my writing. I was doing what I really wanted to do. And I studied those things to keep from studying writing, because some of the writing courses I had are English courses. I never had a writing course. I had English courses. One of them told me when I wrote a story, said, I hope you're never going to be a writer because this is too fantastic. And
oh my gosh.
And I just thought, yeah, I'll show you. Yeah, I'll show you. And then but anthropology and stuff was kind of geared me over to the side where I could think about other things. And I still get mad when people call chimpanzees monkeys. So you can see I had quite a impact. That's wrong.
I wrote a children's story that will never be published that says I'm not a monkey's uncle, and it goes through all the great apes, including bonobos, because I get really mad and we're like, they're not monkeys, okay? But
I'm
you're
saying
safe though. We're not going to encourage any more bad mouthing of Tolkien, but he's not watching, so you can't offend him.
Yeah.
So you're safe on that run. But
no, I will say I loved the Lord of the Rings.
I think I offend a lot of readers.
Peter Jackson might be watching.
I don't think there's anything wrong with it. I just was never drawn to high fantasy much. I liked fantasy, but I liked Richard Matheson and Bradbury, and there's some things in between. You know, I like some Robert E. Howard. At least in the earlier days, I think there came a point when I said, you know what? I think I know how this works. And I love it. I love Howard because Howard represents to me a Texan who was isolated like I was and who decided, I'm going to do this, and did. And I did the same thing, except I was a happier person than that guy. But, you know, his stories were very limited to me after a certain point. I still go back and reread them from time to time. I still have a love affair with him and Burroughs, but I think there are certain writers at certain points in your life that will hold your heart forever. And there are some who impress you that you'll forget within a week. You know, it's hard to always know what touches the spine, you know, but for me, Edgar Allan Poe and later Raymond Chandler, but Edgar Allan Poe and Burroughs and people like that were really important to me. And then when I discovered Raymond Chandler and Hammett and Kane, and then I realized the world was bigger than horror and science fiction and fantasy. And I had always read adventure novels like Jack London and things like that. And I realized one day, why do I have to choose? I don't have to choose.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to. I like listening.
Yeah, in your writing, you don't. And I think one thing, when you said you're a happy person, that comes across so clearly in your writing. When I started reading Moon Lake, I started putting down some of the lines that just made me crack up. And I had to stop because I was never going to get through the book doing that, where you describe the landlady as having her hair looking like it was colored by strawberry jello and beet juice. And I just laughed so hard on that because it was such a perfect description. And you knew it wasn't exactly a put down, but it probably wasn't a compliment because no one's trying to look like a fruit salad. But so many of the lines are just, here you are dealing with some really suspicious, suspect things, some macabre issues. And then meanwhile, he's talking about putting a rhinoceros in footy pajamas. That juxtaposition just sings to me. And you also get stuff like that when you have Elvis and JFK and a mummy.
Yes.
I mean, I don't know.
Down to Bubba Ho-Tep forever.
Yeah. And Bruce Campbell in the film, he just nailed it. You know, him and Ossie, they just nailed it.
When I heard the premise of Bubba Hotep, I thought to myself, there's never been a movie that is more being written specifically for me, because I have always had a strange fascination with JFK and Elvis and mummies. Yeah. So when I heard this, I was like, what is this magical film? I couldn't wait to see it, and I've seen it so many times, and I was like shouting it for like years. I'm like, it is the best representation of a movie that I would write myself. Like, what if Elvis, JFK, fought a mummy?
Yeah, the funny thing about that is that comes from the fact that my sister-in-law graduated high school with Elvis in Memphis. You know, at
what? She really?
Yeah, because like I said, they're 17 years roughly older than I am in that area, and so my brother met Elvis through her. And so when he first met Elvis, he was working at a theater showing people to their seats with a flashlight. That's what Elvis was. He wasn't Elvis yet. He was Elvis, her schoolmate. But my brother said when he met him, he said, boy, that guy's got something. I don't know what it is, but he's got something. Because my brother was trying to record records. brother did music and stuff like that. He had a band and he wanted to record, and he made some attempts at Sun Records, and he went into one place. He finally decided he might get into radio, and he went to one place and was sitting and talking to this other guy who was trying to get into radio too. And it was a school for that, for people with voices that were good for radio and things like that. And they got to talking, and that guy was Johnny Cash.
Oh,
and that's before he was Johnny Cash. And then weirdly, and his son, John Carter Cash, who I think is just a hell of a good guy, is my daughter's producer for a couple of her CDs, you know, for her music. And so it was kind of like a big full circle in a way. And we went over to Gladewater, where I grew up. Right down the road, they had a radio station, and Elvis and Johnny Cash and Jerry Lee Lewis and Ray Price and numerous, people played there live. And I was just living down the road listeling to it on the radio. But to me, it was just listening.
You could have gone. You could have crashed.
I didn't know. Couldn't. I was too small.
Well, they would have let a
like 5 or 6
kid in there. Come on.
Yeah, and there was we lived on a hill with a honky tonk below us and a drive-in theater across from us, and then down the road a little bit was that radio station, and that radio station became a place where you can record music, and it does producing of music. And my daughter did 2 songs there, so she could stand in the room where Elvis, played live. They didn't record there; they played live. And on the wall, they have the old soundboard where Jerry Lee Lewis scratched his name into it. And so it's kind of become like a little historical site in Gladewater. And I can't remember the call letters of the radio show, but Tom Perryman was the guy there. And Tom Perryman, in the history of music, is very, very important, especially rock and roll music and early country music of that era. Anyway, country music of that era, because Sun Records and the Louisiana Hayride and Gladewater were the most important places where Elvis and Cash and them play. Cash wrote "I Walk the Line" in Gladewater, and so.
Sorry,
yeah, in one of the backstage where he was supposed to go on, and the little hotel or motel where Elvis stayed is still there. It's been turned into an apartment complex, but they still have his little card where he signed in the room and everything. So it's got this big rockabilly history that made it fun for her to record there, and it made it fun for me to think they were just down the road from me, and I was too little to realize it.
Well, I'm just thinking summer vacation road trip. I'm going to Glade.
I know, like what a
you
great
need to
place
go. You need to go. Yeah.
Great. So that's where you get your Elvis inspiration. Where did the JFK?
Well, I was a kid when he was assassinated, and that was just like an incredible impact on all of us, And I grew up on mummy films, and I was always fascinated with those things. And I had this title in the back of my mind called Bubba Hotep. And it was my plan to use it. Oh, and I might ought to add before I forget it, in Gladewater, they have a giant bookstore like Larry McMurtry used to have that takes up an entire couple of blocks. And if you ever go to Gladewater, you can shop for crazy for books, And it's.
I think I hear that.
And that wasn't there when I was growing up. And the Cozy Theater I used to go to is still there, but it's no longer open. I think it's for sale. I was tempted.
How much do we need to gather to buy this movie theater?
I'm not sure.
For how much?
I'm not sure.
Like we could turn that into like a film house and artists and writers retreat, and
I wish.
I don't know if I'd ever get out of the bookstore. I would just be happily lost looking for the books.
Say that could be a good retirement plan for your family. Owning a theater.
It could be. Yeah,
maybe your daughter can move in from like accounting to.
Right. Right. Well, she's got her career as a singer and a writer and PR, and she used to do some modeling. She's been in films. I mean, I don't know what else she could add to what she's doing. My son is a stockbroker, and he's written 2 screenplays that have been filmed. He's got 2 under option. He and I co-wrote a novel. He's written a short story, and he's written a lot of comics. So, I mean, we're all busy.
You have incredible DNA.
Yeah.
Well, my wife actually wrote a few stories with me, but she is really the manager and the person who made this all work. And, I think about that every day. You see us up front, but here is the real brains behind the operation. She kept us from running into each other more or less. And I've always felt that I was the luckiest person in the world in that respect. And I met her when we were 21, and we've been together ever since. And I'm 70 in a couple of months. So,
Wow. That's amazing. But I also just love hearing everybody's involved and everybody's doing all these things, but also working together rather than competing against each other or trying to one up each other. But right. I mean, your daughter sounds like she's what's a girl version of a Jackie of all trades, a Jacqueline of all trades, or do you just go
Casey of all trade? Yeah. My brother also does some publishing. He used to write for comics. He wrote for the last incarnation of Tales from the Crypt, and my niece Pam Dunklin, also Pam Lansdale, she had a TV show called Lone Star Justice, because she was a detective for the sheriff's department, and when she retired, they put that show together with her and the sheriff that she worked for and her partner, and they did a series of episodes that were true crime on the ID channel. And there's other stuff like that. Most of the other people kind of popped up later. I think I started the fire and everybody else started throwing some wood on it. I'm glad.
I like it.
Is there a way that we could become members of your family?
Yeah. How does this? And is it an open adoption? Do you adopt?
You don't really need to pay.
We've already adopted Hansi Oppenheimer, so we've kind of got our hands full.
Okay. Like Allison and I can kind of manage ourselves, but if we could just be maybe like foster kids, adopted, like long distance foster kids of the Lansdale family. We would...
long lost cousins, perhaps.
Oh, we could be cousins.
Well, I was laughing today because my maiden name is Keene, and we were commenting on Carolyn Keene, which I know growing up when I learned that was a pseudonym and there was no real such person. So I'm like, I'm not related to anybody cool or famous. And I was like, no, sorry, there's no such person. And your dad.
In Batman, there's a Keene. You get to be at least a comic book character's relative.
I'll take that. Yeah, I'll take it.
And in Batman, so my father, who's also was a mechanic, was named Jim Gordon. So that's why I thought Batman growing up, because I was just like, as a redhead, I just assumed I was Batgirl. My name definitely Barbara Gordon. They just named me the wrong name. And then my mother's name is Yvonne, and Yvonne Craig played Batgirl in the show. Right. So there was this 6 degrees of Batman. So it took me a really long time to figure out that I wasn't actually Batgirl.
No.
So you wanted to be an attorney, you wanted to be a scientist. I'm like, I want to be Batgirl.
Also valid.
Also a valid.
Batman changed my life. Yeah, Batman changed my life in many ways. It was one of the major influences of me to be a writer, but also he was interested in martial arts, which I've done for 58 years now. I'm the grandmaster of the Shinchuan martial arts system, and I'm the guy that's passing it on now. I still teach. I still teach a private class every Wednesday, except this one for obvious reasons.
Oh my God!
But you're missing your class for us.
You're missing.
Yeah.
Sorry to all of Joe's students.
I know.
We'll
sorry,
give them back.
future superheroes.
Don't come after us.
When I was a kid, my mom made me a Batman costume because I was going to be a crime fighter in Mount Enterprise. And one night I woke up and found out the next morning the Mount Enterprise bank had been robbed, and nobody had sent a bat signal or woke me up. And I had my own little costume. I had my ears, and I looked more kind of like an angry German Shepherd. With my little suit.
The ears are pretty close.
I realized then I wasn't going to be a crime fighter because nobody was letting me know what's going on. So that was that would have been your police commissioner's fault. Whoever the Jim Gordon was of your town. Yes, he's the one in charge of that bat signal, and
it's not on you.
I don't even know if they had any police there. I don't remember back then. I think that was. I think the sheriff kind of covered that area. They do. I think now they've got one policeman that gives tickets and stuff, but I don't think there was anything like that then.
Oh. So you're saying it's a town that's perfect for a bank robbery because it is.
Yeah, it was. It was robbed several times.
Well, and that was something even in Moon Lake, that was something that was interesting because here you've got this town. It's you got the sheriff department and you've got a police department, and who's kind of in charge? No one's really sure. And is anybody doing anything about clearly corrupt things going on? Meh. No one seems to be all that concerned. What did you said there was someone in your family named Pam who's police related? Were they all concerned? Did they read Moon Lake and say this is a bad representation of our justice?
No. She read Moon Lake and she was a very fine detective, and she solved a lot of cases. I'm really proud of Pam. And then she was a private detective for a little while after that. And then she got into this film thing, but she's done a ton of other things besides that. But that's kind of the stuff that, stands out, at least to most people.
Oh,
and
Chad
she's
says,
someone
Yeah, can you see
Chad,
the comment?
Thank you.
Chad, yeah, he's saying, love
Yeah,
Moon Lake,
but
great book.
She liked the book too. She, we know that there's been corruption, but we know there's been places that aren't corrupt. It's not, when you write crime fiction, you're not picking the best attributes of human beings. That's
Right,
why
yeah,
it's got crime.
That's not fun.
Yeah.
I mean, even when you write horror,
it doesn't mean
like,
they don't exist, but it means you're writing something else.
Yeah. So when you're writing, do you know, like, do you plot everything out, or are you just like discovering it as you're writing?
I discover it as I go.
Yes.
I think my subconscious is doing it at night, because I get up every morning and I'm ready. And I have a minimum set of pages that I'm set to do, 3 to 5. And then a lot of times I'll get 10, 15. And I polish them as I go. I don't do drafts. I don't do multiple drafts. Except on the computer, I'm probably doing all this stuff every day. And then when I get through, I do one polish. And there's been a novel or story here and there that's a little bit more difficult than another, so I had to work harder. But generally, once I get to the end, it's 95 to 98% there. And then when just rereading it, I get the rest of it. And that works for me, because I found that I used to try to do all these different drafts. And I know people swear by it and they like to feel good about themselves.
I do it and I don't feel good about myself.
No, I don't either. I felt awful. I felt anxious and worried, and I couldn't keep up with which draft was what and how it. And I just said, you know what, that ain't working for me. And so I just wrote carefully, and I wrote as well as I could, which can vary from time to time, I'm sure. And I discovered that the muse doesn't really. I'm the muse, and the rest of that's just bull, because I wrote just as well on the days when I thought I was inspired, just as well on the days I thought I wasn't inspired as those when I was inspired. I was just having a better time on those days,
You're just happy you're doing it.
Yeah, my friend and a very good writer, Stephen Graham Jones, once said, they were talking about writer's block, and Stephen said, do ditch diggers get ditch digger block? He said, they get up and they go to work, and that's what I do. Yeah. I don't get
words
writer's
on
block.
pages.
I got stuff to do. Yeah,
okay,
some days might be harder than others. Huh?
Yeah. No, I was just gonna say. So you say your goal is like 3 to 5 pages per day. What does that roughly translate to word count? Because people draft differently, have different size font and white space. What's that about?
I use big font, and so it can make me easier to get my 3 to 5 pages.
Big font, triple space.
I do 20 point. 20 point.
20 point. Well. I would need 20 point if I took these. I would need 50 point if I didn't have these on all the time.
Well, I have these glasses and I keep these as security, but I had my cataracts removed. I got 20/20 vision, but
nice.
I still keep these around because I'm scared, but
yeah.
I realize I can read whatever, but I do that, but I often get 6, 7 pages, sometimes 10. So if I set out to get 3 to 5, I'm a hero every day. And then some days I'm more of a hero. And then if I have a bad day, on those days when I did really good, I'm pretty much even. But I don't have many bad days. Yeah.
You just keep going with it. Well, and I love that you polish as you go, because I feel like you may be the first person we've talked to who does that. And that's how I generally go. And I know they say, just stop messing with it, come back to it. But I can't just leave it if I'm like, this isn't right yet. Well, and then by the time I'm done,
I might write that 3 to 5 pages straight out. But when I get through, I'm going to go back and tamper with it. And I'm not going to quit for the day, which I never work over 3 hours a day. Most of the time, 2, 3. And I still get that same number of pages, So I'm averaging 25, 35 pages a week on just an average week. And on other weeks, well, I might get 10 pages a day. I might get 70 pages that way. I work 7 days a week.
Well, and to clarify, you've also put out 50 novels, so that explains how you do that. Plus, but that's not counting teleplays, novellas, short stories,
comics.
Someone else was drawing those. So admit it, that was not you.
Short pieces are probably over 400. Counting. People will say short stories all the time, but I'm counting articles, essays, and all the short stories and novellas and things like that. So you're looking at a lot of short pieces. It might even be closer to 500, if you count all that. And I've done a lot of scripts that, I've been paid for Ridley Scott and people like that John Wells, and things that didn't get made, but I got paid,
That's really all that matters.
I know,
did a
well,
script
bank.
for the Hap Leonard TV show that did get made on the second season. And I've done Batman, the animated series. I did, 4 of those. I did a Superman. I did a Batman movie called Son of Batman. And I've done so many different things, the Jonah Hex short. And then a lot of my stuff has been done like for Love, Death, and Robots. And, they did the adaptation. So I've got all these different things. I've done a play. I've done two 1-act plays. I want to do a 2-act. I got a musical in the works. And, and I'm planning on directing a film here soon if everything goes well. And it may not.
Joe.
Well, I hope it does.
I hope it does too.
I want to hear the musical.
I know.
The musical, Judy Pancoast wrote the music for it I think except for one song my daughter wrote, but she also did what they call the book, meaning that, it's the playbook, and it's a screenplay my son wrote because it was filmed in a real low budget screenplay, kind of done through the university here, Stephen F. Austin State University, where I was writer in residence for a while. And so he did the screenplay, got made, and then she took his screenplay, and his screenplay was based on a short story I wrote. And so then she did the book, and we're going to do a podcast, I hope, first, and then we're going to try to put it on stage as a musical. So
like a podcast, like a radio drama?
Yeah.
Very nice.
Yeah.
So
okay,
with music. It's music.
What does a writer in residence do?
I taught.
Okay, so like a lecturing writer in residence.
Right. Yeah. Well, just like any other teacher. I mean, I had graduate students, and I had, in some places I had less than graduate students. And Tom is saying he saw a version of the musical in New Hampshire. We did a stage reading, and which was a lot of fun. Yeah, it was like we were taking notes and finding out what worked, what sucked, that sort of thing. And Judy had a lot to do with that, and she's the hero of all this.
Mailing list.
I know. What theater did you do this in?
In New Hampshire.
I don't remember where we did it. I don't honestly remember. Maybe
Tom, if you're still watching, tell us.
I know. I'm just like, how did I miss this happening?
He said, "No, I've said my piece. I've gone home. Goodbye."
That's fine.
Yeah, that's all I had to say. I just want to say, I've seen this. So do you have a favorite type of work you do? Like, do you or is it whatever you're working on at the time? Like, do you prefer shorter pieces, novels in a series, a standalone?
I like short stories better than anything, and I probably would do a lot more of them if, I felt like I would make as much money as doing the other. But I don't write the novels just for money, but I write them for money too, if you know what I mean. I make a living doing this, and I can't keep doing it if I don't. But I love novels too. It's just I prefer short stories. Novels are second. I think after that it's martial arts, and then it's
where does Batman fall?
It's films and comics. Well, that's next. Films and comics and all that, because I've also written a lot of comics. And that's a dream come true. I finished an Edgar Rice Burroughs Tarzan novel that he left unfinished. He had about 80 pages, and I finished it. I did a Batman novel. I did a Batman young adult or really young version called Terror on the High Skies. The novel was captured by the engines. So I've done a lot of that kind of stuff. I did the Lone Ranger comics, Jonah Hex comics with Tim Truman, who's, my favorite artist to work with. I did Conan. My Conan had a sense of humor, which kind of upset some of the diehards.
The diehard Conan fans do not want him cracking jokes.
I really, Howard was Howard. He did his thing, and I wanted to give him his due, and I wanted to be, I wouldn't be doing this without Howard. And as a writer, he had a lot to do with me being a writer, especially being a Texan. And an introduction he wrote about that to Wolf's Head had more impact on me than his stories. And so, I had fun with it, but I wasn't going to try to pretend I was Howard or Edgar Rice Burroughs. But I tried to get the Hatbox Theater, he says. Yeah.
That is where I performed for 5 years.
Was that where you're doing
burlesque
stuff or dance?
That's where I was doing my burlesque shows.
How about that?
I cannot believe. I'm so upset.
Somebody at the Hatbox dropped the.
I know. I'm going to call them out. No, I'm not going to do it.
We took all the notes they gave us,
let you know.
and Judy revised revised it some here and there. It played really well. You know, we didn't have all just necessarily the actors that would be in the show and whatever, but we had all the singing, and we had the zombies were great. Their performances were just fantastic.
There were zombies?
Yeah, Christmas with the Dead. That was a short story, and you know they had sort of rock and roll and all kinds of music. It's got all kinds of music in it.
So rockabilly zombies. That's what I'm gonna.
And Judy wrote some stuff that I think was somewhat marginally operatic. You know, and I think that's really cool. And it's good stuff. I look forward to it. We've been going on with this for years because it has to be a secondary thing so we can raise the money. But I think the podcast, which looks like it's on the horizon, I hope, and then that will be followed, I hope, by the musical, and we'll see what goes from there.
I want tickets.
I want to go. Again, that checks off the rest of the boxes that Mummy, Elvis, and JFK didn't check off. It's like musical.
You just said rock music. If it's a rock opera with zombies, I am there.
Well, some of it sounds rock-like, and some of it is really more, I guess, what you think of as stage musical approaches to music, and it's a variety. I mean, it really is a mixed bag. I think when we first started doing it, Keith, who wrote the screenplay, and me, and a friend of ours, Tim Bryant, who is also a musician, and we were, and Brad Mall, who was one of the stars in the film. He was in General Hospital for 20 years.
I was going to say, why do I know that name? Oh, General Hospital.
Dr. Tony. Yes. Dr. Tony.
I know.
Yeah. And he started that, but he sang
Bobby.
one of the numbers, and he's a great singer. So we sat around the table with, Judy singing and Brad singing, because he lives in Nacogdoches and teaches film, and so Tim was there to listen to the music. I was there to comment, but Judy was saying, I don't know, we're mixing all kinds of music. I said, believe me, this works.
Do it.
Yeah, we did.
Oh,
and she did a great job.
I'm really geeked up about this more than probably I've ever been excited about anything in my life, because again, you just checked off the General Hospital box that I didn't even expect it to be popping up in there. I'm like, wow, my childhood and my teen years.
Brad used to be with
20s.
Some music group. I can't remember. He was with them. It's something like the New Christy Minstrels. It's not that, but it's that kind of, maybe it was that. Anyway, I don't know, but he was with some group like that, and he's been in a lot of other shows, and
he's very
done
talented.
A lot of stuff.
And I remember him singing a couple times at General Hospital.
Right, he directed a small film just a couple of years ago that I don't think enough people have seen, and it's just terrific. And the guy's multi-talented, and I'm glad he's here in Nacogdoches.
Amazing. I'm sorry. I'm just I have to pick my jaw up off the floor.
Bring it back up.
So
Dr.
excited.
Tony, if you remember, he was the really good looking doctor. He was the guy
remember. And I do remember. And I was just about to start rattling off General Hospital plots, but I'm not.
No, that's okay.
That. I'm just gonna.
No, and I was going to say, as soon as you said, "Oh, he's the good-looking doctor," I would challenge anyone to show me a General Hospital or any soap opera doctor where it isn't the good-looking doctor, because it's not the joke.
You got to
dreamy,
point
Doctor Sexy, Doctor Handsome. It's kind of a requirement, like med school and supermodel, both.
Yep. Yeah, because that's exactly who's becoming doctors.
Mm-hmm.
It's just the really attractive people of the world.
And Brad had a part in they were going to refilm Christmas with the Dead with more money as Christmas with the Damned, and they took the original script, and my son wrote it, rewrote some of it, but he also was going to direct it, and he was going to do it more like he had envisioned it when he wrote it, and Brad was going to be in it, and COVID came, and so that got killed. And that's what happened with the one I was going to direct. We were working on the one I was going to direct, and COVID kicked that out. Peter Dinklage, who's still going to do The Thicket next year, but at that time he'd had options on it, and the COVID killed it twice, So,
what was Peter Dinklage going to do other than probably drink?
My novel, The Thicket.
That's amazing.
He was supposed to do it last year. It's scheduled for next year sometime. I think early, but I can't say for sure what they're going to do. But they re-optioned it, so I know that they intend to do that. And then I've got some stuff I've written that's coming out in film, but I can't talk about it right now. So
I hate that. So pesky.
I think that's every time we've gotten anybody who's got something in the works for film, it's always, I've got something, and that is all I can tell you is that it might exist, and you might eventually hear about it.
And then
but
sometimes we grill people.
I spent the money.
You spent the money. You're like, I don't care what happens next, so long as I have the check. The check went to the bank, and you guys do something with it maybe later. I would love to see it when it's done.
Well, they did Cold in July, and I was very happy with Cold in July. They did the Hap Leonard TV series. I was happy with that. I was happy with Bubba. I was happy with Incident on and Off a Mountain Road on Showtime, Masters of Horror, the Batman stuff I did. So I've had a really, and the Love, Death, and Robots that they adapted. I've had a really good run. So I'm due for a big stinker.
No.
Well, first off, it's not Moon Lake. And second, I just wanted to throw out there to properly prepare it. Last night, I did watch an episode of Batman, the animated series, Perchance to Dream, because when I told my husband that we were interviewing you, my husband is not the biggest reader, despite the fact that he actually teaches writing. But when I told him you'd written for Batman, the animated series, he got super excited, started looking up which episodes. Some of his favorite are ones you've written. So I said, okay, well, do you want to watch one? Yes, I want to watch one. So we watched it last night.
Cool. That's a fun one.
He was excited about that.
I got to work with Roddy McDowell without ever meeting him because he was the Hatter.
He was,
and
Elizabeth
Montgomery. Yeah, and Elizabeth Montgomery was in Showdown, and she used to be on Bewitched, of course.
Yes.
And so that was cool. And I think David Warner was in that episode.
There was one more voice I recognized, and I had to pull out my phone immediately and look at it. I'm like, why do I know this voice? And it was Diana Muldaur, who was also on Star Trek The Next Generation as Dr. Pulaski. Okay. I'm like, I knew it. Nerd alert. I hear Star Trek voices, and I'm like, I know this person. Hold on.
I would have gotten the Elizabeth Montgomery, though.
You would have gotten Elizabeth Montgomery. But
I think she was also in a Lizzie Borden TV movie in the 70s.
She was.
Yes.
And that was where they first
I know my creepy New England stuff.
Right. That's where they first did that theory on film where she did the murders nude so that the blood washed off very quickly and she was able to get dressed and not have blood on her. That was at least their
very
theory.
Pragmatic.
In a weird fun fact, at that Hatbox Theater where you did your stage reading, I did a Lizzie Borden burlesque number.
Only you would do Lizzie Borden.
With your hatchet? Did you have your hatchet?
There was a hatchet. I wasn't Lizzie. I was the maid that she might have had a relationship with. It was, powerful theater. It was a burlesque Lizzie Borden. It was our Halloween show.
It sounds
fun to me. It did get a standing ovation. People were like, that made me cry weirdly.
Like things they did not expect when they walked in the door that night.
Good. At least they're not like crying like, oh no, my eyes.
That's my pit bull you hear. He's barking.
I keep hearing a little bark going on, and I keep thinking it's my dog. And then
that dog is clearly bigger than your dog. That dog would eat your dog.
It's Nikki. Yeah, it's Nikki. He gets chased up the drive by rabbits, so he's not a...
I love pit bulls.
He just tries to act. He pretends to be one. He plays a pit bull on TV.
Most do. But really, they are all
they're lovers.
Like little babies.
Yeah. Yeah, they like to get up close and hug,
Joe, you have been an absolute delight. I hate to cut this off, but we are out of time.
I understand. I appreciate you having me.
We really appreciate that you gave up your martial arts class for us tonight, Joe. Thank you. I hope it was okay.
Yeah,
were we okay?
They're okay with it. Yeah, they're okay with it. They're okay with it. Yeah, I once in a while they know I have to do it because of my
you
my
have
career.
to be you have
and
to
I
be
used
Joe
to teach
Lansdale.
5 days a week. I taught 5 days a week, and now I have other people who do that, and I teach just the private classes last 3 years or so.
Oh, that's amazing. So Allison and I will probably plan a vacation to where you are. We can talk about the formal adoption proceedings then.
That's right.
Find us in that bookstore somewhere. I'll be in the science fiction shelves.
I'll be in horror.
Yeah. Yeah. You can go to Gladewater, that giant bookstore they have there.
That's where we want.
Alyssa, thank you.
Oh.
Yeah, Elisa says, Joe, you are so fascinating to listen to. Thank you for sharing your stories with us. I could have listened to you for hours.
Oh my gosh.
Well, Elisa, clearly we're going to sign you up for one of his martial arts classes, and then you get to listen to him as much as you want.
Joe, I hope you come back anytime really. you're always welcome. If you ever just say like, I want to talk to those two weird girls again,
Mhm.
we're here for you. We would love that. So
Y'all are a
thank
lot
you,
of
Joe.
fun. I appreciate it.
Thank
Yeah.
you, Joe.
Thank you.
I also want to say thank you to Roman Seriton, our producer. Thank you to Pam Stack, our executive producer. Thank you to everybody at the Global Authors on the Air Radio Network. Thank you to everybody who watches our show every week. We are the number one show, the number one video show on the Global Authors on the Air Radio Network. So without amazing guests like Joe and fans like everybody who's watching, that wouldn't be a thing, but it is. So thank you. Stay tuned next week when we have Carter Wilson, the author of Dead Husband, and also the woman in Apartment 2A, or the body in Apartment 2A. I know I'm
Something
getting
like that.
something with 2A. I know I'm getting that wrong, but Carter will be
I
here
think
next
there's
week.
a murder.
Murder in 2A. It's that. So thank you, everyone. And this has
Thank
been a
you.
copywritten podcast on the Global Authors on the Air Radio Network. And we will see you all next week.